The crystal chandelier at Bistro Laurent cast elegant shadows across our family table, but the atmosphere was anything but refined. I sat quietly in my vintage blazer and paint-stained jeans, watching my family celebrate Mom's 55th birthday while simultaneously dissecting my life choices with surgical precision. I'm Natalie Morrison, though my family had taken to introducing me as our daughter who's still figuring things out. At 31, I was the disappointment who'd chosen art over accounting, who lived in a converted warehouse loft instead of a suburban mansion, who drove a paint-splattered van instead of a luxury sedan. The black sheep who spent her days creating sculptures that my family couldn't understand and didn't value. So Natalie, my sister-in-law Jessica said with false sweetness, cutting into her perfectly plated salmon, are you still doing that pottery thing? Sculpture, I corrected gently, taking a sip of water. The wine was too expensive for my supposed budget, according to the concerned looks I'd been receiving. Derek, my older brother and the family's golden child, leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk. He'd built a successful accounting firm and never let anyone forget it. Still playing with crayons? He laughed, loud enough to draw glances from nearby tables. Grow up and get a real job. Mom patted my hand sympathetically, though her eyes held disappointment. Darling, you know we support your hobby. But wouldn't you be happier with some stability? Derek knows several firms that would hire you. Art isn't a hobby, Mom, I said quietly. It's my career. Dad scoffed, adjusting his expensive watch. Career? Natalie, you're 31 years old. When are you going to stop this fantasy and join the real world? Jessica nodded sagely. We're just worried about you. Living in that warehouse district, driving that old van. It can't be safe. Or profitable, Derek added with a laugh. What did you make last year? 5,000? 10,000? I smiled and said nothing. They had no idea about the private sales, the international collectors, the gallery showings in New York and London. I'd learned long ago that sharing my successes with this family only led to demands for loans and investments they'd never repay. There's still time to change direction, Mom continued, clearly thinking she was being helpful. Remember how talented you were with numbers in school? Derek says his firm is expanding. Into the 21st century, hopefully, I murmured. Derek's face reddened. My firm is one of the most successful in the state. We handle accounts worth millions. I'm sure you do, I replied calmly. The Morrison name means something in this city, Dad added, his voice taking on that lecturing tone I remembered from childhood. Your great-grandfather built our reputation on solid business principles. Hard work, practical choices, real value. I thought about the sculpture I'd finished last week, the one already sold to a private collector for more than Derek's annual salary. About the commission pieces in my studio, each worth more than this restaurant's yearly revenue. About the gallery in Chelsea that had been courting me for months. You could still make something of yourself, Jessica said, probably thinking she was being encouraging. It's not too late to start over. Derek checked his Rolex ostentatiously. Speaking of making something, I just closed a deal with Morrison Industries. Biggest client we've ever landed. Maybe you've heard of them, Natalie. They're kind of a big deal. I nearly choked on my water. Morrison Industries was one of my most important clients, though they didn't know Derek was related to me. I'd been working on a series of pieces for their headquarters for 6 months, each sculpture commissioned for more than Derek's entire annual revenue. Never heard of them, I lied smoothly. Well, you wouldn't move in those circles, Derek said condescendingly. The CEO is Alexander Morrison. Tech billionaire. Forbes list. You know, successful people. The irony was delicious. Alexander Morrison and I had been discussing art and philosophy for months. He'd become not just a client but something approaching a friend. He had no idea I was related to his new accountant. I'm sure he's very impressed with your services, I said carefully. Mom leaned forward conspiratorially. Derek, didn't you say Mr. Morrison is single? Maybe he'd be interested in meeting Natalie. A successful man like that might be just what she needs to get her life on track. I nearly laughed out loud. Alexander and I had dinner planned for next week, though my family would have been shocked to know it wasn't the first time. Mom, Derek said with exaggerated patience, a man like Alexander Morrison doesn't date struggling artists. He moves in circles where people have actual achievements. Real accomplishments, Dad agreed. Not finger paintings. Jessica nodded. Perhaps Natalie could take some business classes. Learn to present herself better. First impressions matter in the professional world. I was about to respond when the restaurant's front door opened with a flourish. A familiar figure strode in, commanding immediate attention from the wait staff. Alexander Morrison, tech billionaire and art enthusiast, swept into Bistro Laurent like he owned it. Which, knowing his portfolio, he very well might. His eyes scanned the dining room and landed on our table. His face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Natalie," he boomed across the restaurant, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed dining room. "My favorite artist." Every head in the restaurant turned to stare. The maitre d' practically materialized at Alexander's side, bowing and scraping as he guided the billionaire toward our table. My family sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths, as one of the most powerful men in the city approached us with obvious familiarity. Alexander reached our table and, without hesitation, leaned down to kiss my cheek in the European fashion. "I was hoping I'd run into you. Are you ready to discuss that $50 million commission we talked about?" Derek's fork clattered to his plate. The sound seemed to echo through the suddenly silent restaurant. "Alexander," I said warmly, standing to properly greet him. "What a lovely surprise. I was just having birthday lunch with my family." His eyebrows rose with interest. "Family? How wonderful." He turned to my shocked relatives with his trademark charming smile. "I'm Alexander Morrison. Natalie's been working on the most extraordinary sculpture series for my headquarters. Absolutely revolutionary work." Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Dad had gone completely pale. Jessica looked like she might faint. Derek, ever the opportunist, recovered first and shot to his feet. "Mr. Morrison. Derek Morrison, Morrison Accounting. We spoke yesterday about your quarterly reports." Alexander glanced at Derek with mild interest. "Ah yes, the accountant. Small world." He turned back to me with obvious preference. "Natalie, I've been thinking about our conversation regarding the Tokyo installation. The cultural ministry is beside themselves with excitement." "Tokyo?" Mom whispered. 50 million? Dad croaked. "The Mori Art Museum is hosting a retrospective of Natalie's work next spring," Alexander continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Though I suppose you already know that. Must be very proud of your daughter's international recognition." The silence at our table was deafening. Around us, other diners were whispering and pointing. Several people had their phones out, no doubt recording the interaction between the famous billionaire and the artist they just discovered was related to the mortified family at table 12. "Perhaps I could join you for a moment?" Alexander asked, though he was already signaling the waiter for another chair. I never pass up the chance to meet the family of someone so talented. As he settled into his seat, I caught Derek's eye. My brother looked like he'd seen a ghost. The same brother who'd been mocking my crayons 2 minutes earlier was now sitting across from a man discussing my $50 million commission. "So," Alexander said, spreading his napkin with practiced ease, "you must tell me what it was like watching Natalie develop her artistic vision. I imagine you have wonderful stories about her early work." Mom struggled to find her voice. Well, she was always very creative." "Creative," Alexander repeated with delight. "What an understatement. Do you know her latest piece sold at Sotheby's for $12 million last month? The bidding war was extraordinary." Jessica made a small choking sound. Derek had gone from pale to green. $12 million. Dad managed. "For one sculpture," Alexander confirmed. "Though that's hardly unusual for Natalie's work. The piece I acquired last year has already tripled in value. Smart investment, even smarter art." He turned to Derek with polite interest. "You're in accounting, I believe? You must appreciate the financial success of your sister's career. Very impressive returns." Derek couldn't seem to form words. This was the same Derek who'd been lecturing me about real jobs and practical choices 5 minutes earlier. "I was just telling the family about your Morrison Industries account," I said innocently. Derek was quite excited about landing such a prestigious client. Alexander's smile became slightly sharper. "Yes, well, we'll see how that works out. I do so value competence in my business relationships." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Derek's face went from green to gray. "Natalie," Alexander continued, "I hate to interrupt your family celebration, but I have some exciting news." The Venice Biennale has accepted your installation proposal. You'll be representing the United States Pavilion. If Derek had looked shocked before, now he appeared catatonic. The Venice Biennale was to the art world what the Olympics were to sports. It was the kind of recognition that secured artistic legacies. That's wonderful news, I said warmly. Though I'll need to finish the Morrison Industries series first. Of course. Take all the time you need. Art can't be rushed. He glanced around the table at my stunned family. I imagine you'll all be attending the opening in Venice? It's quite the honor to have a family member selected for such a prestigious exhibition. Mom nodded frantically, though she clearly had no idea what the Venice Biennale actually was. Alexander's phone buzzed discreetly. He glanced at it and sighed. I'm afraid I need to take this call. European markets, you understand. He stood, kissing my cheek again. Dinner Thursday? I'll have my assistant make reservations at Le Bernardin. Perfect, I agreed. He shook hands around the table, pausing at Derek. Pleasure meeting you all. Derek, I look forward to reviewing those quarterly reports. Accuracy is so important in financial matters, wouldn't you agree? Derek managed a weak nod. After Alexander left, trailing restaurant staff and lingering stares, our table fell into stunned silence. The waiter approached cautiously to refill our water glasses, clearly aware that something significant had just transpired. Finally, Mom found her voice. Natalie, $50 million? For one commission, I confirmed. Though there are others. The art world is surprisingly lucrative when you reach a certain level. Venice Biennale? Dad asked weakly. Think of it as the World Cup of contemporary art. Very selective. Very prestigious. Jessica was staring at me like I was a stranger. You're famous? In art circles, yes. I've been featured in Art News, Art Forum, the New York Times art section. My work is in several major museum collections. Derek finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Why didn't you tell us? I considered the question carefully. Would you have believed me? Or would you have accused me of fantasizing again? The truth hung in the air between us. We all knew the answer. Besides, I continued, I tried to share my successes early on. Remember when I got my first gallery showing? You all missed it because Derek had a golf tournament. When I sold my first piece for 6 figures, Dad told me it was probably a fluke. When the Times reviewed my exhibition, Mom said she hoped I wasn't getting a big head about my little hobby. They had the grace to look ashamed. The warehouse loft you're so concerned about? I continued. I own the entire building. It's worth about $8 million. The van you think is unsafe. It's custom designed for transporting valuable artwork. Cost more than Derek's BMW. Derek winced. I don't live the way I do because I can't afford better. I live this way because it suits my work and my values. I don't need a mansion to prove my worth. Mom reached across the table. Sweetheart, we had no idea. You had no idea because you never asked. You never showed interest in my work, never attended my exhibitions, never bothered to learn about contemporary art or what I was building. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. We thought we were being realistic. Practical. You thought you were being superior, I corrected gently. There's a difference. The waiter approached with dessert menus, but the mood at our table had shifted dramatically. My family was looking at me with new eyes, and I could practically see them recalculating every assumption they'd made about my life. The commission Alexander mentioned, Jessica said hesitantly. $50 million? For a series of 7 large-scale installations. It's a 3-year project that will transform Morrison Industries headquarters into a cultural landmark. And you two are? Mom fished delicately. Friends. Colleagues. He's one of the most knowledgeable art collectors I've ever met. We share similar aesthetic philosophies. Derek finally managed to speak. Natalie, I owe you an apology. We all do. I studied my brother's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus damage control. Do you, Derek? Or are you just realizing that insulting me might damage your relationship with your biggest client? His face flushed red. That's not. It's exactly what you mean, I said calmly. And that's fine. Business is business. But let's not pretend this is about family suddenly realizing they were wrong. This is about social and financial calculation. Mom looked stricken. That's not fair, Natalie. We love you. I know you love me, Mom. But you don't respect me. There's a difference. I signaled the waiter for the check. Alexander was right about one thing. First impressions matter in the professional world. And you've all made very clear impressions about what you think of my profession. Where are you going? Dad asked as I stood. Back to my studio. I have a $50 million commission to work on. Derek grabbed my arm. Natalie, please. Can't we start over? I looked down at his hand on my sleeve, then met his eyes. Derek, you've spent 5 years mocking my career, my lifestyle, and my choices. Now that you've discovered I'm financially successful, you want to start over. Do you see the problem with that? He released my arm, looking genuinely confused. You don't want to start over because you realize you were wrong about art or because you understand my passion for creating. You want to start over because you're afraid I'll cost you your biggest client. The accuracy of my statement was written all over his face. I pulled out my wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover the entire bill, plus a generous tip. Happy birthday, Mom. I hope you have a lovely rest of your celebration. As I walked toward the door, I could hear the urgent whispered conversation starting behind me. Damage control, recalculations, new strategies for dealing with the family member who just revealed herself to be worth more than all of them combined. Outside the restaurant, I sat in my paint-splattered van for a moment, letting the irony of the situation wash over me. For years they'd pitted me. Now they'd fear me. Neither reaction had anything to do with who I actually was as a person. My phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Hope I didn't cause any family drama. Your brother seemed surprised. I typed back, only the good kind of drama. Thank you for the perfect timing. Lunch Thursday to discuss the Tokyo details? Absolutely. And Alexander? Derek really is a competent accountant. Don't fire him on my account. Generous of you. See you Thursday. I started the van and headed back to my studio, where 7 partially completed sculptures waited for my attention. $50 million worth of art that would outlast any family drama, any social calculation, any temporary shift in their perception of my worth. In my rearview mirror, I could see my family still sitting at the table through the restaurant's windows, their heads bent together in intense conversation. Tomorrow Derek would probably call. Maybe Mom would stop by the studio. Jessica might even ask to see my work. But it wouldn't matter. Real relationships aren't built on sudden revelations of financial success. They're built on years of support, understanding, and respect. Things my family had never offered when they thought I needed them. I pulled into my warehouse district, past the converted lofts and artist studios, into the loading bay of my building. $8 million of prime real estate that I'd bought with the proceeds from my finger paintings. Inside, my studio was exactly as I'd left it. Sculptures in various stages of completion, sketches covering the walls, the controlled chaos of serious creative work. This was my real world, not the one my family had tried to push me into. My phone rang. Derek's number appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt with sudden declarations of support or belated recognition. My family would have to decide whether they could learn to respect me for who I'd always been, not just for what they'd discovered I was worth. As for me, I had work to do. 7 installations to complete, a Venice Biennale to prepare for, and a career that had succeeded magnificently without their approval. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right regardless of whether they're watching. 3 months later, I stood in the Morrison Industries headquarters, watching as the final installation was carefully positioned in the main atrium. The sculpture series had exceeded even Alexander's expectations, drawing art critics and collectors from around the world to see the transformation of a corporate space into a cultural destination. Extraordinary, Alexander murmured, standing beside me as we watched the installation team make final adjustments. You've created something that will inspire people for generations. The building's lobby had become a pilgrimage site for art lovers. The 7 sculptures created a narrative flow that guided visitors through a meditation on technology, humanity, and the future. It was, without question, the finest work of my career. The Venice pieces are coming along well, I told him. I think you'll be proud to see the United States Pavilion this year. I wouldn't miss it. Though I suspect your family will want to attend as well. Derek had indeed called. Several times. So had Mom and Dad. They'd all expressed interest in learning more about art, and being more supportive. Jessica had even asked if she could bring her children to see my studio. "We'll see," I said diplomatically. "You're being generous considering how they treated you." "I'm being practical," I corrected. "Holding grudges takes energy I'd rather spend on creating." Alexander smiled. "Spoken like a true artist. Focus on the work, let everything else sort itself out." As we watched visitors experiencing the installations, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from meaningful work. Money was wonderful, recognition was gratifying, but watching people connect with art in a way that expanded their understanding of the world, this was why I'd chosen this path. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Saw the piece in the Times about the Morrison installations. Mom wants to know if you'd like to have dinner this Sunday. No agenda, just family." I considered the invitation. My family had learned an expensive lesson about assumptions and respect. Whether they'd learned it permanently remained to be seen. But Alexander was right. The work was what mattered. Everything else would sort itself out. I typed back, "Sunday works. But I choose the restaurant this time." After all, if we were going to rebuild our relationship, it might as well be in a place that appreciated real artistry. Some victories aren't about proving people wrong. They're about proving yourself right, and then having the grace to share that success with people who are finally ready to understand what they'd been missing all along.
"My daughter is joining the company, so I need you to resign. Today is your last day." On the morning of the 20th, the president suddenly told me I was fired. I was shocked and didn't know what to say. The 20th was the day we paid our suppliers. Some payments were made through bank transfers for longtime suppliers, but I also made direct payments and visited them as a courtesy. "You look like you can go home right away. I'll give you the day off, just for you, so leave quickly," the president said. He pushed me out of the office, and the door shut with a snap right in front of my face. I didn't even know where to start to argue. "My name is Emily. I joined this family-owned paving company right after high school and worked as a clerical worker for 10 years. Well, until just now. The company had about 20 employees, and when the current chairman was the president, the workplace atmosphere was great. It was an easy place to work. The chairman, now retired, used to work closely with the younger employees, and his wife, Catherine, would come in every day to help with various tasks until he was hospitalized. Their daughter, Kelly, was skilled in both field and office work. Her husband was the site manager and was trusted by the on-site employees. Even though they were the founding family, they never acted superior or looked down on the employees. It would have been wonderful if this enjoyable and smooth-running company life had continued, but unfortunately, reality wasn't so kind. At the end of last year, the chairman was diagnosed with cancer during the company's group medical examination. He decided to retire as president and appointed Kelly's husband, the site manager, as the next president. Both the employees and I unanimously agreed. We all thought the chairman should focus on his treatment and wish for his long life. However, suddenly, the chairman's eldest son, Tom, appeared with his family. I didn't know where he heard the news from. It turns out the chairman had another child besides Kelly. Tom had been disowned about 30 years ago, and I didn't know about it at all. According to the senior employees, Tom was a troublemaker in his youth and often had run-ins with the police. Whenever he caused problems, the chairman and Catherine would go and apologize. After dropping out of high school, he got involved in multi-level marketing and fraudulent activities, which finally led the chairman to disown him. Despite being out of touch for a long time, Tom suddenly appeared one day, pleading with his father, "Dad, I've realized my mistakes. Please forgive me." I was shocked to witness this in our small company, where the president's office and clerical room were one and the same. Tom expressed a desire to reconcile and work in the company, but his past made it hard to believe his sincerity after being disowned. "I apologize to everyone, but I ask you to give Tom another chance," the chairman said, pleading with everyone present. Kelly and the senior employees knew about Tom's troubled history and couldn't fully celebrate, but they couldn't refuse the chairman's heartfelt request either. So Tom and his family moved into the annex of the chairman's house, with Tom becoming an employee and his wife taking on household duties. I saw their daughter only once when she visited the company. She seemed to be a college student. The chairman believed Tom had changed for the better after facing hardships in life. Catherine was overjoyed that Tom had returned with his family, talking about rebuilding the company together. However, soon after, a problem emerged. Tom insisted on something. I'm the eldest son, so I should be the next president, declared Tom, straining his relationship with Kelly and the site manager. Despite pretending to work diligently in front of the chairman, Tom actually did very little. He frequently made demeaning remarks like, "Physical labor is for the workers, and you're all just worker ants, work silently." Naturally, his behavior quickly made him unpopular with everyone. Some of the younger employees even went directly to the chairman, saying, "I can't work under these conditions." However, both the chairman and Catherine pleaded with everyone, saying, "We will talk to Tom about this. Please try to see the bigger picture." Then, due to stress or other reasons, the chairman's cancer suddenly worsened and he was hospitalized 3 months ago. Tom declared, "I am the president." Despite employees advising the chairman and Catherine to stick with their original plan of appointing the site manager as president, they ultimately chose Tom, their biological son, over their daughter's husband. This decision sparked grumbling among some employees, who felt the chairman and Catherine were biased by parental love or losing their sharpness with age. The once harmonious company atmosphere turned tense and uncomfortable. As tensions grew, Kelly and the site manager began working behind the scenes to manage the company. This left me alone handling all administrative tasks, whereas before Catherine, Kelly, and I shared the workload. Now, I regularly work overtime, sometimes leaving so late that the date changes before I head home. Meanwhile, Tom seemed to view administrative duties as effortless, spending his days at hostess bars, betting on horses, or gambling. My relationship with the president took a serious downturn over an expense issue. He had been using the company's credit card for personal dining and entertainment expenses, and I had been overlooking it to some extent. However, this time, the expense crossed a line. With apprehension, I handed the receipt back to him. "I can't approve this expense," I told him. "What? Why not?" he demanded. "This is for your wife's corrective underwear. It's not related to business, so it can't be expensed." As expected, the president's face flushed with anger. "Don't challenge me. She's the president's wife. It's natural for her to dress well. This is a valid expense." "No, that's not how it works. Your wife's underwear can't be considered a business expense." I stammered, struggling to comprehend how the president could justify a $4,000 expense for his wife's corrective underwear. His next suggestion left me even more bewildered. "Then let's turn selling corrective underwear into our new business venture. We'll categorize it as inventory so it counts as an expense." The president seemed pleased with his idea, but I was at a loss for words. "We're a paving company," I managed to say. "So what? We can threaten clients that if they don't buy from us, we'll cancel their contracts. Everyone will buy. It's easy money, $2,000 for one, $4,000 for a set." The president chuckled loudly, but I felt horrified. "That's absolutely unacceptable. It will damage our credibility." I snapped at him in anger. From that moment on, I became the target of the president's disdain. Day after day, I endured constant berating from him. The situation became so difficult that I considered quitting many times. However, I continued to endure and work, driven by my loyalty to the chairman who had always supported me and my concern for the team who would struggle if I left. The truth was, I couldn't afford to lose my job suddenly either. I decided to tough it out until the right moment to move on. But then, unexpectedly, I was fired. If I quit abruptly now, it will cause problems for our clients, I thought to myself. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my courage and confronted the president. "I can't do this. I can't just leave without proper notice and handover. Even your daughter wouldn't be able to handle the workload. Besides, today is the day we need to handle payments," I said in one breath, fully expecting the president to erupt in anger. As expected, the president's face turned red with anger. "Shut up. I told you to resign because my daughter is joining the company. Today is your last day. As for the payment, let them wait until they come to collect it. There's no need to pay them up front." "Excuse me, isn't it normal to pay for something once you buy it?" I was shocked and explained it patiently, as if talking to a child. But the president responded with something so unreasonable that I couldn't believe he was being rational. "If that's the case, just threaten to switch suppliers. Tell them we won't make the payment this time, so they should give it to us for free." "What? That's not something we can do, is it?" I was so stunned that I couldn't find the right words to respond. "You're completely useless. My daughter has a college degree. She can handle office work easily. As family, she won't question my expenses like you do. You're all talk and no action. We don't need someone like you in our company. Leave now, the president sneered. It seemed clear he intended for his daughter to handle accounting so he could justify personal expenses as business expenses. Oh, is that so? Just remember, I won't regret this, I replied. Words were futile at this point. My patience had worn thin. I quickly gathered my belongings and left the company, feeling sorry for our clients. I called Kelly, despite knowing Catherine and Kelly were busy with the chairman. This was urgent. I explained everything and trusted the rest to Kelly. Once I left the company, I suddenly found myself with nothing to do. Being fired without notice clearly violated labor standards laws. If I reported this to the labor standards office, the company would be in trouble. Since our company was part of the middle company payment system, I could claim my severance pay and 1 month's salary. This system supports small and medium-sized enterprises that can't afford severance pay on their own. I didn't need to rush because I could apply within 5 years from my retirement date, and the Labor Standards Office had a 2-year statute of limitations. With my professional habits, I planned out the necessary procedures and timeline for retirement. I decided I could take it easy for at least a week. Lately, I had been working overtime and weekends nonstop, leaving no time for myself at home. There were many places I wanted to visit once I settled down, so I chose to go on a day trip to the beach for a refreshing break. After enjoying myself at the beach, I checked my phone in the locker and found several missed calls, emails, and voicemails. Among them, Kelly's email caught my attention. It said, "The payment process went smoothly. Everything is in order." I felt relieved. Despite the abruptness of my dismissal by the president, I couldn't shake the guilt of leaving my job in anger. Next, I listened to the voicemail from the company. It was the panicked voice of the president saying, "Hey, what's going on? They're saying I'm not the real president. Did you know about this? Explain yourself." After chuckling at his realization, I continued to check my emails and voicemails. Among them was a message from the chairman, so I promptly headed to the hospital. Arriving at the hospital room that evening, I found Catherine and the president already there. As soon as the chairman saw me, he greeted me from his bed. "Emily, I'm truly sorry for my foolish son." "Hey, what's going on? I'm not the official president. Explain yourself." Tom shouted arrogantly, clearly not understanding the situation. The chairman quickly silenced him with a stern command. "Quiet down." It turned out that right after I had called Kelly, she promptly informed the chairman and Catherine. Upon receiving the news, the chairman immediately contacted Tom, who was acting as president, and asked, "Do you really not know anything? So what's the truth?" I calmly explained to the president, who was still shouting in confusion. "Essentially, Tom, you didn't have any legal authority. Your role as president was just a title. It might seem confusing, but in business terms, president is a position within the company and doesn't hold legal standing like a representative director does. The representative director is the one legally responsible for the company's actions externally. It's a different and more formal role that requires specific legal procedures to change." I continued, "While the title of president can be changed informally within the company, altering the representative director involves complex legal processes. That's why your position didn't carry the legal weight you assumed it did." 3 months ago, when Tom was appointed president, there was strong opposition from Kelly, the site manager, and veteran employees. That's when I proposed a strategy. Tom would be a figurehead president while the chairman remained the legally responsible representative director. As someone familiar with company procedures and laws, I knew the complexities involved. Under my plan, if Tom showed genuine dedication and won over all employees, then we would initiate the legal process to formalize his presidency. However, if Tom failed to prove himself fit for the role, the backup plan was to either remove him or even consider closing the company, while Kelly and the site manager prepared to launch a new venture. Kelly doubted Tom's ability to change. The chairman and Catherine continued to believe in Tom until he unfairly dismissed me, which seemed to awaken them to his shortcomings. "If you want to be a leader, learn and take care of your employees. I've told you this many times," the chairman emphasized. Tom retorted, "It's not a big deal, right? Can't we just handle the procedures now?" "No, it's not possible," the chairman explained. "Our company offers stocks to employees who want them, and many of them own shares. Emily owns 10%, making her a major shareholder. We can't disregard her views, and other shareholders won't support you either." As the president began to understand the gravity of the situation, his face paled. What? I don't have any shares. None. I plan to pass on my shares to you once you prove yourself as president. I'm deeply disappointed in you. Were you only interested in my wealth, thinking I didn't have much time left? The chairman slumped in despair, and Catherine remained silent, visibly upset. Defiantly, the president responded, Well, I'm the eldest son. What's wrong with taking what's rightfully mine? The company belongs to me. I can't forgive you anymore. The chairman bears full responsibility as the representative director of this company. Moreover, I'm a shareholder. I have the right to call for a shareholders' meeting and propose your removal, I asserted firmly. The president's face drained of color as he grasped the implication of removal. You mean I could be fired? Dan, you were just a clerk. Tom, Emily is right. At this point, no one will support you. Emily was the only one who spoke up to give you a chance. Catherine interjected. Then Catherine turned to me. Emily, I owe you a sincere apology. I regret causing you trouble because of my love for my son. Please tell me what you'd like to do. I confronted the president directly. Mr. President, I no longer wish to work under your leadership, so I am resigning immediately. However, I expect to receive my severance pay, along with 1 month's salary including unpaid overtime and holiday pay. As a shareholder, I will also take action through the Labor Standards Office to remove anyone who is detrimental to the company. I spoke calmly, and as I did, the president's complexion shifted from pale to completely white. Continuing, I informed them how Kelly had been actively visiting clients and successfully promoting our new company. Many clients had already decided to switch from our current company to the new one, and most of our employees were planning to follow suit. That's impossible. I'll sue you. The president threatened, his voice cracking. But the chairman intervened firmly. I am the representative director. You have no such authority. The president collapsed to his knees, and I felt a mix of emotions: regret, disappointment, and a sense of closure. Mr. President, it's unfortunate it had to end this way. If you had changed your approach upon returning, things might have been different. There were ample opportunities for understanding if you had made efforts to learn and adapt. Ultimately, it was the president himself who squandered those chances, a classic case of reaping what one sows. In the aftermath, the chairman decided to shut down the company, leaving Tom unemployed. The president's wife attempted to sell corrective underwear, but it didn't succeed. They faced legal issues for aggressive sales tactics and were eventually arrested for involvement in a pyramid scheme. When Kelly returned to her parents' home, she found boxes of unsold underwear left behind. As for the daughter, she found employment elsewhere, although the specifics are unknown. I now work happily at Kelly's and the site manager's new company. I cherish my relationships with others and strive to live authentically each day.
Christmas Eve at the Henderson family house always followed the same script. Mom would spend weeks transforming our suburban home into something that belonged in a magazine spread, complete with professional decorations, catered appetizers, and enough champagne to stock a small restaurant. Dad would invite his business associates and their families, turning what should have been an intimate holiday into a networking event disguised as family time. And I would sit in the corner, watching my parents perform their annual tradition of reminding everyone within earshot that I was the family's greatest disappointment. This year felt different though. Not because anything had changed about their expectations or my apparent failures, but because I'd finally reached a point where their opinions couldn't touch me anymore. At 26, after 3 years of careful planning and strategic silence, I was ready for them to learn exactly who their disappointment daughter had become. The evening started predictably enough. I arrived at 6:30 wearing my usual thrift store sweater and worn jeans, carrying a small gift bag that contained homemade cookies for my 12-year-old cousin Ashley. She was the only family member who'd ever shown genuine interest in my life, probably because she was too young to understand that I was supposed to be the cautionary tale. "There's our little artist," Mom announced to the room as I walked in, her voice carrying that particular tone of affectionate condescension she'd perfected over the years. "Still pursuing your little craft projects, I see." The assembled guests, a mix of Dad's colleagues from the investment firm and Mom's country club friends, turned to look at me with polite interest. I'd been introduced as the artistic one so many times that most of them probably assumed I spent my days finger painting or making jewelry from bottle caps. What they didn't know was that my little craft projects had generated over $3 million in revenue in the past 18 months. "Hi, Mom," I said, accepting her air kiss greeting. "You look beautiful. Is that the new Chanel dress?" "It is. Your father insisted I treat myself. Business has been so good this year." She gestured toward Dad, who was holding court near the fireplace, regaling a group of associates with stories about his latest real estate acquisitions. Business had indeed been good for Dad. Good enough that he'd bought Mom the $4,000 dress, the new BMW in the driveway, and the vacation home in Aspen they'd been posting about on social media all fall. What he didn't know was that his good business year had been largely subsidized by investments I'd been making in his company through a shell corporation I'd established 2 years earlier. My brother Michael appeared at my elbow, carrying a crystal tumbler filled with what I recognized as Dad's expensive scotch. At 28, Michael had perfected the art of looking successful while accomplishing remarkably little. He worked at a marketing firm downtown, lived in a luxury apartment paid for by our parents, and drove a car that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Well, he said, looking me up and down with practiced disdain. "The prodigal daughter returns. Still shopping at Goodwill, I see. Still living in Mom and Dad's financial shadow, I see," I replied sweetly. His expression darkened, but before he could respond, our cousin Ashley bounded over with the enthusiasm only 12-year-olds could muster for family gatherings. "Katie, I didn't know you were coming. Did you bring any of your art stuff? I told my friends at school about those paintings you showed me last summer and they want to see pictures." "I brought you something even better," I said, handing her the gift bag. "I made these myself." Ashley opened the bag and pulled out a tin of decorated sugar cookies, each one hand-painted with intricate designs that had taken me hours to complete. Her face lit up with genuine delight, the first authentic emotion I'd seen all evening. "These are amazing. They look like tiny masterpieces." She held up a cookie decorated to look like a miniature Van Gogh Starry Night. "How do you even do this?" "Lots of practice," I said, watching Mom approach with that familiar look of patient tolerance she wore whenever Ashley showed interest in my work. "Ashley, honey, don't get too excited," Mom said gently. "They're just cookies. Katie's very creative, but let's not make a big fuss. Just cookies." I'd spent 40 hours over the past 2 weeks creating edible art that could have been displayed in a gallery, but to Mom they were just cookies. The same way my paintings were just little pictures, my sculptures were just playthings, and my entire career was just Katie's art phase. What Mom didn't understand was that my art phase had evolved into something considerably more substantial than weekend crafts. Over the past 3 years, I'd built a business empire that spanned fine art sales, commissioned sculptures, licensing deals for my designs, and a recently launched line of luxury home decor items that had been featured in Architectural Digest and House Beautiful. But I'd kept all of that carefully hidden from my family. Not because I was ashamed of my success, but because I'd learned early that sharing good news with people who expected you to fail was an exercise in futility. They'd either find ways to diminish your achievements or take credit for enabling them. Better to succeed quietly and reveal the truth when the moment was right. That moment was tonight. The gift exchange began around 8 o'clock, following the same hierarchy it had maintained for as long as I could remember. Dad and Mom exchanged expensive presents that had clearly been chosen by personal shoppers. Michael received the latest tech gadgets and designer accessories. Ashley got everything on her Christmas list plus several items she hadn't thought to ask for. And then everyone turned to look at me expectantly. "I'm sorry," I said, settling deeper into the armchair I'd claimed in the corner. "I can't afford gifts this year. Money's been really tight." The silence that followed was deafening. Not because anyone was surprised. My financial struggles were a well-established family narrative, but because I'd stated it so matter-of-factly in front of Dad's business associates. Mom's cheeks flushed pink with embarrassment. "Katie, surely you could have managed something small. Even homemade gifts show effort." "I brought Ashley cookies," I pointed out. "I meant for everyone," Mom said, her voice taking on that edge it always carried when she felt I was reflecting poorly on the family's image. "This is Christmas, honey. It's about showing appreciation for family." "And I do appreciate family," I said calmly. "I just can't afford to show it financially right now." Dad cleared his throat from across the room. "Katie, if money is such a problem, maybe it's time to consider more practical career options. There are plenty of entry-level positions available for someone willing to work hard. Entry-level positions. I was sitting in a room full of people who considered Dad a successful businessman, listening to him suggest I find entry-level work, while he remained completely unaware that I'd been one of his company's largest investors for the past 2 years. You know what your problem is? Mom continued, warming to a familiar theme. You've never learned the value of money because you've never had to earn it properly. Art is a lovely hobby, but it's not a career. Mom's right, Michael chimed in, clearly enjoying the opportunity to lecture me in front of an audience. You're 26 years old. Most people your age have established careers, savings accounts, retirement plans. You're still playing dress-up with finger paints. I looked around the room at the assembled guests, most of whom were politely trying to pretend they weren't witnessing a family intervention disguised as a Christmas celebration. These were successful business people, the kind who understood financial planning, investment strategies, and wealth management. They were about to get a very interesting education in assumptions. You're absolutely right, I said, standing up and smoothing down my thrift store sweater. I should probably check my finances more carefully. Mom, speaking of finances, how are yours doing? When's the last time you actually looked at your bank balance? Mom laughed. That particular laugh she reserved for my most ridiculous suggestions. Typical. The family disappointment strikes again. Katie, honey, your father and I are doing perfectly well financially. We don't need to check our balance like college students. Dad nodded in agreement, his expression patient but condescending. We've been managing money since before you were born, sweetheart. I think we understand our financial situation. I'm sure you do, I said pleasantly. But humor me. When did you last actually log into your bank account and look at the numbers? This is ridiculous, Mom said, but I could see uncertainty creeping into her expression. Why would you even ask that? Just curious, I said. You seem so confident about your financial situation. I'd love to see that confidence in action. The room had gone completely quiet. Dad's business associates were watching this exchange with the fascination people reserve for car accidents, unable to look away but uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Fine, Mom said, pulling out her phone with an exaggerated sigh. If it will end this nonsense, I'll show you exactly how wrong you are about our finances. She opened her banking app, entered her password, and waited for the account information to load. I watched her face carefully as the numbers appeared on her screen. The color drained from her cheeks so quickly I thought she might faint. That can't be right, she whispered, staring at her phone. This has to be some kind of mistake. What is it? Dad asked, moving closer to look at her screen. The savings account, Mom said, her voice barely audible. It's almost empty. The checking account too. How is that possible? Dad grabbed the phone from her hands, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he saw the numbers. This has to be an error. Call the bank. Someone's made a mistake. Maybe check your credit card balance too, I suggested helpfully. With shaking hands, Mom opened her credit card app. The number that appeared on the screen made her gasp audibly. $43,000, she read in a voice that cracked with disbelief. I owe $43,000. But that's impossible. I pay the balance every month. Do you? I asked gently. Or do you pay the minimum and assume Dad's covering the rest? The silence that followed was profound. I could see the pieces clicking into place in both their minds. Months of unchecked spending, assumptions about automatic payments, credit card bills that someone else was supposed to be handling. The vacation house, Dad said suddenly. The mortgage payments. I thought you were handling those. I thought you were handling them, Mom replied. And the BMW payment? I thought that was coming out of the business account. I watched my parents realize in real time that their comfortable lifestyle had been built on a foundation of assumptions and miscommunications. They'd been living like wealthy people while their actual finances crumbled beneath them. This is impossible, Michael said, though his voice lacked conviction. There has to be an explanation. There is an explanation, I said calmly. You've been spending more money than you've been making. For quite a while, actually. That's ridiculous, Dad snapped. The business has been doing incredibly well. The best year we've ever had. Has it? I asked. Or have you just been assuming it was doing well because money kept appearing when you needed it? The look of dawning horror on his face told me he was beginning to understand. Dad, I continued. When's the last time you actually looked at your business financials? Not the summary reports your accountant sends, but the actual detailed statements. The accountant handles all that. James has been managing the books for 15 years. And you trust James completely? Of course I trust him. He's family. James, Dad's brother-in-law who'd been managing the company's finances since before I was born. The same James who'd been embezzling money for the past 3 years, thinking no one would notice because Dad never looked at the detailed reports. The same James whose theft I'd discovered 6 months ago when I'd started investigating the company's finances as part of my investment strategy. You might want to call James, I suggested. Ask him about some of the recent transactions. Dad fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed. The conversation that followed was brief and devastating. James wasn't answering his phone, and when Dad tried calling the office, he discovered that James hadn't been seen in 2 weeks. He's gone, Dad said numbly. The office manager says he cleaned out his desk and hasn't been back since. And the money? Mom asked, though her voice suggested she already knew the answer. Gone too. The Christmas party had transformed into a wake. Dad's business associates sat in stunned silence, realizing they were witnessing the collapse of a family's financial foundation in real time. Mom clutched her phone like a lifeline, staring at the devastating numbers on her screen. We're ruined, she whispered. The house, the cars, the vacation property. We can't afford any of it. Actually, I said, settling back into my chair, that's not entirely true. Every head in the room turned toward me. You can't afford any of it, I clarified. But it's not going to be a problem. Katie, Dad said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, this isn't the time for optimism. We're looking at bankruptcy. Foreclosure. We could lose everything. You're not going to lose everything, I said calmly. Because I'm not going to let that happen. Honey, Mom said gently, I know you want to help, but this isn't something you can fix with good intentions. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Actually, we're talking about $847,000 in combined debt, I said, consulting my own phone. Plus the $320,000 that James embezzled from the business over the past 3 years. The specificity of those numbers got everyone's attention. How do you know that? Michael asked suspiciously. Because I've been tracking your finances for the past 6 months, I said simply. Ever since I discovered the embezzlement. You've been what? Dad's voice was sharp with confusion and anger. Tracking your finances. Monitoring the embezzlement. Documenting James's theft. Preparing for this conversation. I stood up and walked to the center of the room, making sure I had everyone's complete attention. 6 months ago, I hired a private investigator to look into James's activities because some of the business transactions didn't make sense. We discovered that he'd been systematically stealing money for 3 years, covering his tracks by manipulating the summary reports you relied on. Why didn't you tell us? Mom demanded. Because I needed time to fix it, I said. And because I knew you wouldn't believe me without overwhelming proof. From my purse I pulled out a thick folder and set it on the coffee table. Complete documentation of James's embezzlement. Bank records, transaction histories, forged documents. Everything you need for criminal prosecution and civil recovery. Dad grabbed the folder with shaking hands, flipping through pages of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic theft and financial manipulation. This is incredibly detailed, he said after several minutes. Professional-level investigation. I hired the best, I said. Former FBI financial crimes specialist. Cost me $40,000, but it was worth every penny. $40,000? Mom stared at me in disbelief. Katie, where did you get $40,000? The same place I got the money to cover your mortgage payments for the past 6 months, I said calmly. The silence that followed was absolute. You've been paying our mortgage? Dad's voice was barely a whisper. And your credit card bills. And the BMW payment. And the vacation house mortgage. And about 15 other monthly expenses that you thought were being covered by business income that was actually being stolen. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen so everyone could see the balance displayed there. $3.7 million, I said simply. Current liquid assets, not counting investment portfolios or business valuations. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. I watched my family process the implications while Dad's business associates tried to hide their amazement. $3.7 million, Michael repeated slowly. You have $3.7 million. In checking and savings, yes. Total net worth is closer to $12 million, but most of that's tied up in real estate and business investments. $12 million, Mom said faintly. You have $12 million. I have $12 million, I confirmed. From my little art phase. The transformation in the room was instantaneous and complete. Every person who'd been looking at me with pity or condescension suddenly saw me differently. I wasn't the family disappointment anymore. I was the family's salvation. How? Dad asked, his voice filled with awe and confusion. How did you make $12 million from art? The same way anyone makes money, I said. I identified a market need, developed products to meet that need, and scaled the business intelligently. I walked over to the mantelpiece, where one of my paintings hung in a simple frame, a landscape piece I'd given Mom 3 years earlier. She'd hung it in a corner where guests wouldn't notice it, treating it like a child's crayon drawing. This painting, I said, pointing to it, was my first commission sale. The buyer paid $15,000 for it. $15,000? Mom's voice cracked with disbelief. For that painting? For that painting. It was featured in a gallery show in New York, where a collector saw it and commissioned 5 more pieces at $25,000 each. Those pieces led to licensing deals with 3 major home decor companies. The licensing deals led to product lines that are now sold in over 400 stores nationwide. I could see them trying to reconcile the struggling artist narrative they'd maintained with the reality of what I'd actually built. The sculpture series I completed last year? I continued. 9 pieces commissioned by a hotel chain for their luxury properties. $180,000 per piece. Plus ongoing royalties. $180,000, Michael said numbly. Per piece. Per piece. The photography collection sold to a tech company for their corporate headquarters brought in another $300,000. The textile designs I licensed to that furniture company you see advertised on TV? Those generate about $40,000 per month in passive income. With each revelation, I watched my family's understanding of reality shift more dramatically. The little craft projects they'd dismissed for years had generated more wealth than Dad's investment firm had ever seen. But you dress like... Mom gestured vaguely at my thrift store outfit. Like someone who understands that expensive clothes don't create wealth, I finished. I dress modestly because I choose to. Not because I have to. And you live in that tiny apartment, Michael added weakly. I live in a tiny apartment because it's convenient to my studio space and I don't need a lot of room, I said. I also own the building it's in, plus the art gallery on the ground floor and the coffee shop next door. The revelations were coming too fast for them to process. Each new piece of information forced them to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about my life and capabilities. You own a building, Dad said slowly. In downtown. I own 3 buildings in downtown, I corrected. Plus a warehouse space where I run art classes for underprivileged kids, and a small manufacturing facility where we produce the licensed products. We. Ashley spoke up for the first time since the conversation had started. You have employees? 47 employees across all the businesses, I said, smiling at her. Including 5 other artists who work on commissions and product development. Ashley looked at me like I'd suddenly revealed I was a superhero. Which, given her family's previous understanding of my life, wasn't far from the truth. Katie, Mom said, and her voice was small and uncertain, why didn't you tell us about any of this? It was the question I'd been waiting for. The one that would determine whether this conversation led to reconciliation or permanent estrangement. Because you never asked, I said simply. In 3 years of building this business, not one of you ever showed genuine interest in what I was doing. You assumed I was failing because failure fit your narrative about who I was supposed to be. The accusation hung heavy in the room. No one could deny it because it was objectively true. Every conversation about my career had been prefaced with assumptions about my limitations and their certainty about my inevitable failure. When I got my first gallery showing, I invited everyone, I continued. Michael said he was busy. Mom said gallery openings weren't her thing. Dad said he'd try to stop by but never did. I remember that, Ashley said quietly. I wanted to go but Mom said it would be boring. When I got featured in Art Monthly magazine I sent everyone copies. No one mentioned reading the article. When I won the Regional Artists Award I called to share the news. Dad asked if there was any money involved and when I said it was just recognition he said congratulations and changed the subject. Each example was a small knife twist but necessary. They needed to understand that their dismissal hadn't been casual oversight. It had been systematic devaluation of everything I'd accomplished. So I stopped sharing, I said. I stopped trying to include you in my successes because it was clear you weren't interested unless those successes aligned with your expectations. But honey, Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes, we would have been proud. We would have celebrated with you. Would you have? I asked gently. Or would you have found ways to minimize the achievements? Suggested I was getting lucky? Warned me not to get my hopes up? Reminded me that art isn't a stable career. She couldn't answer because we both knew what her response would have been. The question now, I said, is what happens next? It was a loaded question. They needed my help. That much was clear. Their financial situation was catastrophic, and without intervention, they'd lose everything they'd worked to build. But help came with conditions and those conditions would fundamentally change our family dynamics. We need your help, Dad said quietly. I hate admitting that but it's true. Without your help we'll lose the house, the business, everything. I know, I said. And I'm willing to help. But not unconditionally. What do you want? Michael asked and I could hear the wariness in his voice. I want respect, I said simply. I want acknowledgement of what I've accomplished. I want to be included in family decisions that affect everyone. And I want the dismissive comments and condescending attitudes to stop. Done, Mom said immediately. I'm not finished, I continued. I also want Dad to step back from day-to-day business operations and let me restructure the company properly. The embezzlement happened because there were no financial controls in place. That changes now. Dad winced but nodded. Whatever you think is best. And Michael, I said turning to my brother, you're going to earn your place in this family's financial future. No more handouts. No more trust fund lifestyle. You want to benefit from the family's wealth, you contribute to building it. What does that mean? He asked nervously. It means you're going to work for me, I said. Learning the business from the ground up. Proving you can create value instead of just consuming it. The transformation in Michael's expression was fascinating to watch. For the first time in our adult lives he was looking at me as someone with power over his future rather than someone beneath his concern. And if I refuse? He asked. Then you find your own way in the world, I said calmly. Your choice. The room was quiet as everyone processed the new reality. The family hierarchy had completely inverted in the span of an hour. The person they'd dismissed as the failure was now the person who controlled their financial future. There's one more thing, I said, pulling an envelope from my purse. Mom, this is for you. She opened the envelope with trembling hands and pulled out a check made out for $50,000. What's this for? She whispered. Christmas gifts, I said. Since I told you I couldn't afford them. The check represented more money than she'd ever held at one time, but the gesture meant something beyond the dollar amount. It was proof that I could have afforded elaborate gifts for everyone. I'd simply chosen not to participate in the family's gift-giving competition. Katie, she said, tears flowing freely now, I'm so sorry. We've been terrible to you. Dismissive and condescending and blind to what you were achieving. We all have been, Dad added. You've accomplished something extraordinary and instead of celebrating it, we've been treating you like a charity case. I don't need apologies, I said. I need different behavior moving forward. You'll have it, Mom promised. Whatever you need from us, you'll have it. I looked around the room at my family, flawed, proud, and finally humbled enough to see me clearly. This wasn't the Christmas celebration any of us had planned, but it was the conversation we'd needed to have for years. All right then, I said, settling back into my chair. Let's talk about how we're going to rebuild this family's financial foundation. And this time, everyone's going to know exactly what's happening with the money. As the evening progressed, we outlined plans for restructuring Dad's business, implementing proper financial controls, and establishing new family dynamics based on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. It would take time to rebuild trust and establish new patterns, but for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about our family's future. The best part was watching Ashley's face as she realized her struggling artist cousin was actually a successful businesswoman. She spent the rest of the evening asking detailed questions about art, business, and what it took to build something meaningful from scratch. Maybe she'd be the next family member to surprise everyone with what she was capable of achieving. As I prepared to leave that night, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Katie," she said, "I need you to know how proud I am of you. Not just for the money, but for the strength it took to succeed despite our lack of support." "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know. And I need you to know," she continued, "that we're going to do better. Be better. You deserved our support and encouragement all along, and you'll have it from now on." I hugged her, really hugged her for the first time in years, and felt the possibility of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine understanding. Sometimes the best Christmas gift you can give your family is the truth about who you really are. Even when that truth forces everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about success, failure, and what it means to support the people you love.